Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to the what may be maybe the one and only podcast episode from Clipdad.com, where I'm going to talk to the podcasting attorney, Gordon Firemark, about the legalities of royalty-free music in podcasts and not so royalty-free music in podcasts as well, and just, I guess, music and entertainment in general, which I first found out about Gordon about, I think about 3 years ago. I was looking up on how to legally use music in short films that I was making. And it was mainly just so I wouldn't get yanked off of YouTube, I hate to say, but really, like, the morality of it is that you shouldn't steal people's music and use it in videos. So that's why I had Gordon on the show, is I basically wanted to clarify just the legalities of royalty-free music versus music through publishing companies, and the different aspects of music and how it relates to podcasting specifically, because I know that there are different rules as far as film and podcasting and everything like that goes. How's it going tonight, Gordon?
Everything's great, Rob. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. It's kind of like you're a celebrity to me, because you know, I've had a lot of questions.
I'm famous in my own mind.
Well, not in your own mind, you know, on YouTube. So it's like, when I started this business about 8 months ago, which is basically a royalty-free music website, I had no idea what royalty-free music really was even. Mm-hmm. And so I had to do a lot of research, and your YouTube videos really clarified it for me. And I'm like, oh, like, as long as I lay this out, I should be all set here. And, like in text, like a list of do's and don'ts and whatnot. Yeah. And it's really kind of helped me get started. And, I mean, I hate to say, like, I am only 8 months in, so I'm pretty sure that I'm not 100% legal, but I think I'm mostly, on board with the legalities of it. But, and you also have your own podcast, the Entertainment Law Podcast as well, right?
It's called Entertainment Law Update, and I've been doing that since 2009, and I have a co-host in the Dallas, Texas area. She and I connect up once a month to do a roundup of case law, legal news, and stories in the entertainment field, about mostly American law, and we have a good time doing it. So we're on 127 episodes now.
Wow, that's quite you reached the centennial marks. That's amazing. Yeah. So a lot of podcasters give up today. They do maybe 20 episodes and then they fail. But at 127, you're in it for the long haul, probably.
Well, yeah. I mean, we do a monthly show, so that isn't, that's a lot of years. But,
so yeah. That's like a once a month show, or maybe a twice a month mm-hmm. show, and you have 127 episodes. So you've been involved in podcasting since the early days, it seems like, if you were to mathematically figure that out.
Yeah, the beginning of time. Yeah, I discovered podcasting when a guy named Leo Laporte started doing a podcast. He was a TV host that I was following, and he started a podcast, and I thought, oh, that's cool. And then, a year or so after I started seeing his show happening, I was invited to be a guest on a show, and having been an audio guy, I figured out how to hook up the mics to the computer and that kind of thing. And one thing led to another, and I started my own show. This was now 2009, so we're in our 12th year of podcasting.
Wow, that's great. So that kind of makes you a podcast pioneer, if you think about it. It's like even like Joe Rogan Experience was around, in 2012 or something was the first episode?
Something like that, yeah. So, no, I definitely one of the OG, old original gangsters.
That's great. It's like Keith and the Girl, Gordon Firemark, Adam Curry. No.
Won't go quite that far.
Yeah.
Nice company though.
Yeah. That's. I used to listen to Keith and the Girl back in the day, and that was a great show. And so, do you have an intro song for your podcast?
We have a little musical doohickey that I actually cobbled together. Being a sound guy before, I was able to grab some royalty-free clips and cobble them into something. And it is what it is. I wouldn't call it musical talent, but musical cut and paste, I guess.
And it's your own original music?
No, it was a clip. Actually, I think I got it. I found it originally in the GarageBand library of clips and effects. And then when I realized I wanted to use it for my show open, I checked the library license, and I realized that wasn't going to fly. So I went and tracked it down and got it from, I forget which royalty-free house it was at the time. But now it's been absorbed by one of the big ones.
So music in GarageBand is not royalty-free?
It is royalty-free for certain limited purposes. And as soon as you go into commercial use, it becomes a question mark. And being a lawyer, I look at question marks and think, let me make sure I get this right. So,
yeah, right.
It ended up costing me $100 royalty-free from that royalty-free house that actually controlled it. So it wasn't a big deal.
Yeah, that's not too bad. Just to make sure, if you're going to be using it for 12 years, you want to make sure that on the front end that everything lines up.
And at the time, they didn't know what a podcast was, and I was educating them. And since I'm an entertainment lawyer, I drafted the license, and it gave me rights in perpetuity and all media, now known and hereafter devised, and all the good language that I'm sure they would never dream of granting it.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. And but if you create your own sounds in GarageBand, then but you use
it's original with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So but if you use a loop, that probably muddies the water a little bit as far as, what is yours versus if you use, say, a bass loop, then the melody is intrinsically there and you're kind of building on top of it. So they could probably make a case that you're actually using the music for whatever the wrong purpose maybe.
Yeah, I think you have to, the real point here is you have to check and make sure. You can't just rely on, it's from GarageBand, or, I got this in whatever audio tool you're using, and assume that it's yours for free for any purpose you want. You've got to read the fine print, read those end user license agreements. And the same is true if you're going online and purchasing or you're subscribing to a library of royalty-free music. You got to make sure that it covers you. There's a few out there that end up taking podcasters by surprise, and that's part of what I'm here to try to make sure people aren't taken by surprise.
Right. So if a royalty-free site has a list of do's and don'ts on it, and how far does that get the actual site in legal purposes?
You can rely on that information to an extent, but the real license agreement is the governing document that you have to look at. And so when you make a decision to purchase something, you've got to check and make sure that the actual license that they grant covers your intended use. The big issue for podcasters is they find a piece of music and they license it, and it's licensed, the license seems to be fine, and then you realize it's only for a single use. And then there becomes this question of, is a single use, if I use it as the opener for my show, and I do that show every week or every month, now is that one use, or is that 50 uses a year? And then do you have to go back and pay for that license every single time? That's not really royalty free when you think about it. So the term royalty free is there's no clear legal definition of what that means. It means usually that it's a single purchase price for the license, and there's no back-end compensation due to the owners of that copyright.
I see. And I'm guessing with podcasting, it's kind of a different medium if you think about it. It's like films and things like that are more tangible, whereas podcasting is, they say downloads, but you don't actually download it anymore. It's still a stream. So it's kind of like, I'm guessing that maybe they can get by on the same rules as how Spotify kind of skirts around those old music deals. I'm going to take issue with what you said, that it's not a download. They're not really downloads anymore, because even a stream, if you get into the real technical engineering nitty gritty of it, is what was really characterized as a progressive download. The bits are changing, the data is moving from one place to the other. It is not like a broadcast over the radio where there's nothing in between. So technically it is a download, and we've sort of decided as a international community that a stream is going to be treated like a public performance covered by a public performance royalty or PPO kind of a situation, but that the download part of it isn't.
And I'll say that some podcatcher software does still download, because if you can take your phone on an airplane and turn it into take it off the internet and still listen to the program, that's downloaded. It's living on your phone. That's a copy.
That's a good point. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. I do that all the time, actually, when I listen to like podcasts. Yeah, and so it's as far as like I always think of podcasting as, well, I'm a big Howard Stern fan going all the way back to the 90s, but I always think of podcasting in the same way that I think of radio. I know that there are different rules, as far as syncing and things like that go, but podcasting, isn't it more or less a similar kind of medium, because you're taking spoken audio content and then you're mixing it with either pieces of music or whole songs. So, are the rules that vastly different, or are the rules vaguely similar on that?
I would say that the medium feels similar to a lot of people, especially people who have come up from the radio, either as radio audience or radio creators, broadcasters. As a practical matter, I think that they are different enough media that we have to think about them a little differently. One of the areas that I'm on a little bit of a crusade is that everybody who records a podcast with a guest should have that guest sign a release document that gives them permission to record and use the content and distribute it in any media without any revocability or anything like that. So, Robbie, since we're talking about it, I'll say I hereby grant you the authority to record my voice and to use the proceeds of that recording in any and all media, whether now known or hereafter devised, for any and all purposes, in perpetuity.
Now, I love that.
So you would never hear of a radio station or radio DJ asking someone who calls in to sign a release, right? So there's a difference. One of the differences is that radio is ephemeral. The broadcast happens, it's over, it's done. There may be an air check recording somewhere as sort of evidence in case there's ever a problem, but it's very unusual that air check recording ever becomes widely distributed. Now, radio stations are getting into doing podcasts. They have gotten into doing podcasts and things like that as well. So they're making the transition into this more permanent, evergreen media kind of an environment. And they too are having to deal with the fact that it's no longer just an ephemeral transmission of a copyright or of material. There's a recording being made and it's being distributed, and that invokes different copyright rights that are covered, for copyright owners. So I think the media are a little bit different. And that's why it's hard for someone to do a podcast that is essentially a music-oriented radio show. You can't just spin records and pop in between with a short break. If you're doing critique and commentary of the music, you might be able to do something. But Spotify has just introduced a new podcasts with music, I think is what they're calling them. And their rules, in order to comply with their licensing, their deals with the record labels, is it has to be a certain amount of talk in between the song. I think it's 10 minutes of talk per song played or something like that. So it really isn't tune in here and get your music, get your fill of music. It's tune in here and get your fill of this host with a little music on the side. So I think that's different.
Yeah, I just actually started a music podcast with my friend with Anchor and Spotify, that whole combo there. And
right.
I have a few hundred songs on Spotify. I'm a musician. And I'm kind of, I don't like their business model, but by the same token, like my 8 fans, they wanted my music on Spotify, and they actually reached out to me because they wanted my music on Spotify. So, and I decided it would be good for SEO and things like that. And plus I want my music to be heard at the end of the day, not like, I don't have any records for sale or anything like that. So I found for me, it was a good medium, even though I'm kind of against it. But what's your opinion on Spotify in general, and just this new relationship with, it seems like they're gobbling up the whole field of podcasting.
Well, let's remember that Spotify is sort of 2 different kinds of businesses. One, look, they're a subscription business. If you want to get good, get your music and have it delivered your way, you sign up and you become a subscriber with Spotify, and you get the playlists and you get to listen to pretty much any song out there nowadays. And they pay their royalties based on the stream to the PROs, and that's how the composers and the artists essentially get paid. That business model, fortunately or unfortunately, it is the way we are now, and it's been that way for quite some time. The podcasting arena, Spotify also sort of does two things. One is they'll put lots of podcasts on their service, so their users, their listeners, their subscribers can access podcasts without having to go to a different tool or a different app on the phone or whatever. But they also have some shows that are exclusive. The Joe Rogan Experience, for example, has now become an exclusive podcast on Spotify. I don't technically think that's a podcast anymore. I think the definition of a podcast is an audio or video program that is distributed by an RSS feed that's basically open and accessible to anybody on the internet. So once you get into that exclusive content arena, we're sort of arguing about the name we give it, but it's a little different. And they are a subscription service, like Netflix or HBO is a subscription service. So you're paying for access to what's in their library. And then, as a podcaster, I feel like, well, if my stuff is also in their library, some people are paying for access to that. Shouldn't I get a little slice of that? And that's not going to happen. So for someone like you, for a musician, you want your music accessible to as many audience members as possible. And, they're going to find it one way or another, but if they can find it on their favorite tool, they're more likely to listen more often and tell their friends and spread the word. And that's what being a musician really relies on.
Yeah, I see your point there. I didn't like, I think his name is Daniel Ek. I didn't like his statement about if you're not happy with the money that you're making, just make more music, because for some people, that's the difference between I'm making $3 a year through Spotify versus I'll be making $6 a year on Spotify. It's at the end of the day,
if you make twice as much music, which costs a lot, right?
Exactly. So that statement to me, regardless of what the situation is or what people, it's kind of the devil situation, but regardless of if people want to use it or not, it's I thought that statement was really insulting to musicians everywhere.
Callous and insensitive to the realities of what musicians go through to make the music happen.
Yeah, I mean, in my case, I just took my Bandcamp catalog and put it on Spotify because it's just, I thought it was better it's a much more seamless. I mean, I use Spotify myself, and I think it's the reason why I use it is because when I listen to bands that I really like, or podcasts that I really like for that matter, what I love about it is that it just jumps me to something else that I really like that I didn't even know of before. So it's almost get that, not only do you listen to the stuff that you like, but it's get that Pandora aspect of it.
The discoverability and recommendation engine. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I love. That's what I used to love about Pandora as well, is that, you could really get turned on to some new stuff through that.
Sure.
But okay, great. Wow. I was going to ask you that later in the conversation, Gordon, but you telepathically predicted my questioning. So we can save that for the next conversation, I guess, to talk about Spotify. So now we can get to the nitty gritty of what I wanted to ask you about, which is why is royalty-free music? Well, you kind of answered that with the you can use it repeatedly, but why else is royalty-free music good for podcasts?
Well, let's budget. That's the main reason, right? Sure. Royalty-free. So what royalty-free music seems to mean, for most of us, is pay once for the music and use it, however you intend to use it. As I said earlier, one of the problems is that pay once still depends on a clarity or lack of clarity about pay once for what kind of use. Can I use it over and over and over again, or can I use it only in one production? And if it's one production, is a podcast episode of production, or is a series of podcast episodes all considered one production? So this is what we lawyers do, is we parse things and drill down into the meanings of the sentences. But the idea of royalty, well, let's talk about the idea of a royalty is that normally with a piece of music, when you use it in some kind of a product or in a program, the expectation is that the artist, the record label, the publisher, and the songwriter are going to get paid on an ongoing basis from use fees. Essentially, royalties are sort of like use fees. So when when you have, you have the ASCAP or the BMI or whatever, you're in the UK, so it's PRS, right? And these performing rights societies collect for the public performance of the music. And there's sometimes royalties for physical copies, like if you were to sell records of your recordings of your show. The expectation would be that the owners of copyrights embodied in your work would be paid a percentage or a fee on a per unit basis, per play or per download or per sale of a physical copy or something like that. So what royalty free means is, no, we only do it. You buy the license once, you use the music, you never have to worry about paying for it again. And the broadcasters wouldn't have to pay. The PRS side of it isn't a part of it as well. So that's the intent of the term royalty free. Of course, if you've got a big catalog of very famous music, you're probably not going to be inclined to sell things on those terms without a fairly large dollar amount for a buyout, essentially.
Okay, great. Yeah, I did kind of need some, even though I run a royalty-free website, I hate to say I did actually need a little bit of clarification on that. So thank you. And, as far as Creative Commons goes, I wanted to ask you about that. So I'll just kind of maybe I shouldn't even admit some of this stuff on this podcast in a public forum, but I kind of almost I didn't copy word for word on the record, but I did kind of I was inspired by the Creative Commons 4.0 license, but instead, because it is podcasting, I just kind of I imply that they're to give credit, but I don't. So like for podcasting, I don't necessitate that they have to give credit every single episode in the notes, because the credit for the music on my website, it's kind of a little bit long because I want the website credited and stuff like this. But is Creative Commons even a valid thing that holds up in court? I kind of don't get it.
It is. So to explain a little bit, it helps if we start with, what is copyright? Copyright, look, an author who creates a work is the owner of the copyright in that work, and they have certain exclusive rights to make and distribute copies and perform and display the work and make derivatives and those kinds of things. The other end of the spectrum is the public domain, where something is either old enough or it's been dedicated into the public domain, which means nobody owns it, it's free for everybody to use. Well, the Creative Commons came along when a number of creators realized, well, wait a minute, I don't need to be paid for what I've done as long as I get credit and as long as the people who are using my stuff also don't expect to be paid and or other conditions. And so what the Creative Commons license is essentially a contract between the owner of the copyright, which still persists. It's not fair to say that it's not copyrighted, but the owner of that copyright is saying, look, you can use my stuff provided on these conditions, provided you do the following things. And credit is one, non-commercial is one of the conditions that some of them require. Share and share alike is another component where basically if you use my free stuff in yours, you have to give your stuff away for free as well. And I think there's a fourth one. I've forgotten what that fourth variant is. But there are these 4 or 5 different flavors of Creative Commons license depending on what conditions are going to apply to that song. And the owner gets to say, yeah, you can use it for free as long as you comply with these terms. So what it is a contract. It doesn't have to be, a piece of paper with wet blue ink on it in order to make a contract. And by choosing to use the music under the Creative Commons license, you're agreeing to those terms. So it's valid. It's binding.
Great. And on my website, if I may ask this, I pretty much I went off a Creative Commons 4.0 license for all my royalty-free music. But then in addition to that, I kind of adjusted the wording a little bit because actually my do's and don'ts, quote unquote, for what you can do with the music and what you can't is slightly different than the 4.0 license. So it didn't really pertain to me exactly. So I just kind of made my own and put it on my site. And you have to read that before you're able to download any music off my site. It's before. Right. So in other words, it's not you can just click download and then use it. And then below is the terms. The terms are above or to the side of the music. So, I mean, is that legal? Is that good? Is that not good?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a perfect world, I would want the licensee, that is the user of the music, to have a downloaded copy of the license that was issued at the time that they downloaded. So, yes, they've checked the box and they've said, yes, I agree to these terms, and then the download starts. They ought to get the text file of that license as well as the data file of the music. But yeah, I mean, I think it's perfectly legal, especially if they've clicked a text box or typed in "yes, I agree" or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I use Wix. I'll just be honest about that.
Yeah.
So I have no way to kind of attach a document to the.
Okay.
To the.
Well, you could also just have a link. Here's our document. Make sure you download it so you have a copy on your system. Something like that. Because if you change the terms later on, they want to be able to say, well, but I downloaded it under the terms on November 12th or 13th. It's 13th. So you know what I mean. That's to protect them as much as anything.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I just kind of I've been advising people just to screenshot the
that
terms.
Works. Sure.
But maybe I should actually put the text on the website, screenshot these. Do you think that that's good, or is that even necessary, or is it okay enough just to have the rules on there? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, like I said, I think you definitely should have the terms of use on the website anyway. It's actually that's the contract between you and your customers. So I think it should be somewhere where a link that they can go to and view it on the page. And it wouldn't be a bad idea to have that accessible as a download of a PDF or just a plain text file or something with a date stamp, so that there's some clarity about when things were said a certain way. And then if you ever make a change, they've got that record of what it was on the day they made the download. But yeah, I think the more transparency there can be, the more those rules are visible, and they've had to pass through the rules page before they can access the download page. I think that makes a lot of sense.
That's a great point, Gordon. Yeah, I think I'm going to adjust it after this conversation, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me see. What was I going to ask you next? I was going to ask you, what should people look for in a royalty-free music website?
Well, I think you want. That's a great question. I think you want to know that whoever you're dealing with is reliable. They're going to still be there in a bit, especially if you're subscribing or paying some money. You want to make sure you're doing business with somebody reputable. Those terms should be out there and available for you to look at without having to make a purchase first. So you can see, is this what I need? What rights do I get when I make this purchase of this license? And more importantly, maybe what rights don't I get? Does it cover everything I need to do? So yeah, the more transparency the website provides, the better.
Cool. And do you think that there's a market for an edgy kind of cult music, maybe even punk rock, or really, because the punk rock that I see on most royalty-free sites, it's not punk rock. It's really this generic kind of commercial sounding. I not to mention any names, but every time I've ever looked up punk rock on a royalty-free site, it's always complete not. It's the most pro-establishment music that I've ever heard. So do you think that there's a place for royalty-free music that's a little bit different?
I think there's a place for everything. And the hard part, of course, is getting the word out and having the audience that wants that stuff find you. So yeah, but I definitely think that if you've got a distinctive kind of a sound or a desirable kind of sound, if there are folks out there that want to use punk music in their shows, why not? And the trick is getting a hold of them and letting them know you're there.
Yeah, that's a great point. And which royalty-free sites do you like?
I don't really use them that much. I know that. What's the name of it now? I'm drawing a blank. It's part of that Envato marketplace. I can't remember the name of the Audio Jungle. That's what it is. I like the way they're set up because it's very easy to find the music that you want, but their license isn't quite. It's one of the ones that I was concerned about, that it doesn't allow for multiple episode use, that you would have to pay that fee for each time you use the song in a new episode or something like that. And by the way, you're not getting pop songs that are by famous artists. So you're getting library music created by people who are, doing it for this purpose. And so you're never going to hear the Rolling Stones on a royalty-free site, or any, famous acts. They're not going to be there. Associated Production Music, APM, is one of the biggest production music libraries in the world, and they do have a royalty-free license. So, it's a one-time purchase kind of a thing. They have some great music, and in fact, you hear a lot of their music in popular television shows and films and things like that when it isn't original composition for the show. And their music library is extensive. Omnitracks is another one, and there's a bunch of them out there. I think they're all pretty good. But there are going to be different levels and different sort of qualities of music in them. So just got to shop around.
Sure. I mean, I'm not trying to promo my site or anything, but
I know.
what do you think about a site that, like mine, that has just a blanket agreement? So it doesn't matter if you are there's another royalty-free site. If you're an influencer on YouTube, you have over so many followers, then you pay this rate. If you're this type of commercial business. So I decided on my site just to simplify it. And everybody just pays the same monthly subscription. I have some free music on my site. Do you think that that's a good business model? Yeah,
I mean, I think time will tell, but it sounds like, that simplicity makes it easy for people to understand what they're getting. And yeah, I like that a lot.
Cool. And do you have any royalty-free sites that you don't like? Not to ask you to trash talk anybody, but is there any that you think are the music is bad or the terms are bad or anything like that?
Honestly, I don't have enough experience with them as a user to know what I like. That there's one out there that I don't like. No, I really don't have anybody I want to throw stones at.
Yeah, I get you.
I mean, there are some out there that I've heard aren't so great, and you really do just have to pay attention. I mean, the big ones, the names show up pretty easily when you run searches, and I think if you're doing business with somebody who's been around a while and knows what they're doing, it'll show.
Yeah, I just, some of the big, not to mention any names, but some of the big guys in this industry, I listen to their music, I've listened to a few hundred tracks, and it's so boring to me. I'm just
Well, and that's the nature of production music. And by the way, let's be clear, we're talking about, production music. Most of the royalty-free catalog out there is production music. It's meant for generic sort of background, be the bed underneath a little, an ad for the latest penis pill or something like that.
Right.
And so it wouldn't necessarily be the edgy stuff that has real melody and real, solidity to it. That's a different thing. If you're looking for an intro or an outro for a show, or you're looking to have music you can talk about, you're going to be looking far and wide to find many of those kinds of things. So I think what you're describing as your site being more about the edgy original music, I think there's real value there.
Cool. That's good to know. And do you have a favorite podcast intro song that comes to mind? Or introduction in general, that gets you fired up when you listen to a podcast?
I most of the shows I listen to are using pretty generic production music, to be honest with you. But the story that and the one that I'm aware of is Dan Miller, who's an American personal finance kind of guru and personal business coaching kind of guy. He has a show called The 48-Hour Work Week. And I think it's 48 Hours to the Work You Love, sorry. And his show uses Money, Money, Money. I think that's the one. And apparently he, early on in things, just reached out to the owners of the copyrights and said, can we make a deal? I'll give you $100 a year. And they've apparently said yes and stuck by it all this time.
Wow.
And,
That's a really good rate for that one. That's
it's a classic example of a real, what I call a real song, a famous song being used in a podcast. And I dare say it's the exception rather than the rule that you can do that.
That's amazing. Yeah. I'm big into skateboard videos from even 10, 20 years ago even. But
sure.
I was listening to a podcast with the owner of Zero Skateboards, and he was just saying that one of his skaters really wanted the song I Believe in a Thing Called Love from the band The Darkness.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very, like, it was a big hit, you know, like maybe like 12, 13 years ago, maybe even like 15 years ago. But he said that, like, he didn't pay a lot of money for music, but he wound up paying 10,000 for just like 1/4 of the song. And I was just like, 10,000, like, that's insane. Like, that it would be that much money for, like, not even the whole song. But like, are we talking, is this the norm in music publishing? Are they asking this kind of money for like big, like, hit bands that aren't even relevant today, really?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, that's what, look, let's face it, the music publishing business is in the business of, music publishers are in the business of exploiting music, making money from it. So anybody who wants to use a song that's published by a major publisher will, you know, need to reach out and negotiate the deal. Now, it may be that he didn't do a very good job negotiating his deal, or maybe that he got an amazing package of rights. And so he's good. He never has to pay for music again, and he could do his show for the next 50 years without ever paying another fee. So it's hard to say it's a good price or a bad price. It's a high price.
Right.
But I'll tell you, you know, you want to use a song like that in a feature film, you're going to pay more than that.
Oh, he used it in a video, Gordon.
Yeah, I'm just saying. So,
yeah,
you know, in one video, one skateboard video, that's pretty intense. I mean, I guess if there's a commercial market for the video and you're going to be selling it at a good price, or if there's, again, if it's an ad, if the video essentially is an ad for product, then there's a commercial value to using that famous song. And you know, the publishers aren't in the business of turning people away because they're setting such a high price, but they have to set the price in accordance with what the use is going to really be. And so they ask the right questions, figure out what kind of a use, how much are you using, how long, what's going on the screen while we're using that music. You know, and they also, by the way, won't always give you a license. They may say, no, we don't like the portrayal that is being shown while you're playing that music. Classic example is, you'll never see a film in which, you know, the characters are smoking weed or doing drugs and Jimi Hendrix music is playing in the background because the Hendrix estate won't allow it.
Oh, wow.
There's artistic control too.
Well, I guess, you know, if it did kill the guy, you know, so I can see their point on that, you know, but yeah, wow, that's interesting. I had no idea. I'm a big Hendrix
denial
fan.
Ain't just a river in Egypt.
Yeah, right. You know, yeah, that's, I mean, that makes sense to me. But also the Hendrix estate, I've heard that they're really ruthless about almost everything, you know, so including with themselves.
I mean, but you know, look, here it is how many years later, and his image remains iconic and sort of unblemished, even though he, you know, you and I know he was associated with a drug culture of the time. We don't want his music too deeply associated with that, so that it loses any value other than that kind of portrayal. So, you know, they're being strategic about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So maybe it's a smart move. What's your opinion on just the current absolute boom, especially in a post-COVID world? You know, it seemed like when that first, like, well, I live in France, so we had a forced lockdown, like it's enforced by police, like out in the streets. But like, with these lockdowns happening everywhere and people staying inside just to follow the rules, you know, and not get people sick and whatnot, I mean, it just, there's even more of an insane boom in podcasting. And I mean, as somebody that's been a fan for well over a decade now, I'm kind of like, I think for a lot of people, it's kind of a flash in the pan kind of thing. And then a lot of people are really like, almost like using it, like they don't appreciate the original art form of this method of conversation and communication. So it's just kind of like, well, what's your opinion just on the current boom? And do you think just for podcasting and the freedom of this medium, which you've been involved in for over a decade, actually as a producer yourself, do you think that it's a good thing that this current boom, or do you think it's going to kind of destroy the industry?
You know, what we're seeing, you know, look, I'm excited that audiences are finding podcasts. More people are listening, more people are consuming more podcasts. And that's great for everybody who you know, has a message to put out there as a podcaster. I'm a little troubled by the growth and the massive expansion of the Spotifys and the other major platforms, and they're sort of swallowing everything up. And there's this consolidation in the industry. Spotify just announced another $200 million purchase of another podcast advertising company.
Megaphone, yeah.
Megaphone, right? And that's a hosting company. So does that mean that if your show's on Megaphone now, it's only going to be on Spotify? We don't know the answers to all these things yet. What's troubling, though, is that we're seeing an industrialization of podcasting that had been, up until a couple of years ago, a very grassroots, independent business or independent art form. There are still a lot of, in fact, I'll say it's probably still 95% of all the podcasts out there are independently produced, but they're getting lost in the noise, or they're lost in the volume of these big announcements and these big companies doing everything and pouring money into promotion and so on. It's why more audiences are coming, but those audiences are finding the big ones and not the little ones. And I think the real promise of podcasting is that it gives a fairly level playing field to anybody who has a message to share or a voice they want to give voice to. They can do it. And the good news is that the independents aren't going anywhere. It's just getting a little harder to find us amidst the sea of the ones coming out of the big media companies.
Absolutely. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back. Who wants an intro? Who wants a theme song? Who wants an intro for their podcast? Who wants an intro? Who wants a theme song? Who wants an intro for their podcast? Who wants an intro? Who wants a theme song? Who wants an intro for their podcast? Who wants an intro? Who wants a theme song? Who wants an intro for their podcast show? Clipdad.com Podcast show, Clipdad.com. And we are back in the air with Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer. Podcast attorney or the podcast lawyer?
I go by the podcast lawyer.
The podcast lawyer. And so you're just in general like an entertainment law expert. So I initially looked you up for film purposes, just for YouTube purposes and things like that. Yeah. But so is this kind of a new moniker, or have you had this podcast part of it?
I've been branding myself as the podcast lawyer for the last, 5 or 6 years, on and off. I mean, if I was talking to somebody about the theater, I'd call myself the theater lawyer, because I have that web domain as well. But I've been practicing entertainment law for coming up on 29 years now. And for me, that has been always working with the independent artists and creators, whether it's in the independent film or live theater. I worked in the music stuff for a while, but I sort of gave up on record deals and publishing deals in the late 90s when, I had some experiences with my own clients who were not the most savory kinds of people. And I just decided I needed less of that in my life. So for me, it's been independent film, live theater, a little bit of television work, and as I became a podcaster, I started investigating and looking into the legal issues there. I wrote a book about it, and so sort of put myself out there as the guy to go to for podcasting, and thank goodness it works. I'm very grateful that I'm able to get some people coming in and help them out.
And I was just going to say, over the past 5 months, you must be swamped with work.
I've been very fortunate that since the lockdowns happened here in the U.S., my business has fluctuated a little bit, but it's been relatively stable, and I've been able to continue serving people who are, you're right, there's more content creation going on, and people have the time and energy to devote to doing it right, and I'm thankful they're coming to me to have some help with that.
Yeah, and are you you're out in L.A., right?
Yeah.
And so, LA right now, is it okay out there? Is it? A lot of people are moving to Texas. If you follow Joe Rogan's crowd and stuff like that. So, is LA is it all right safety wise and all that?
Well, I haven't been out of the house in 7 months, other than to go to the grocery store. The numbers here are climbing. California is still below the curve of cases and increases and things like that, because we implemented, somewhat stricter measures early on, and we've sort of stuck with them. But also I think it's just not to be political, but sort of the more open-minded progressive minds are willing to stay home for the good of society and that kind of stuff. And that's the California populace. But the numbers are climbing. It's getting scary again. And as winter comes, I think we're in for a rough few more months before we get this thing turned around. Hopefully the vaccines come along and do the job, and hopefully they find some good cures and treatments for the people who do get sick.
Yeah, and I mean, not to focus on the societal aspect of it, but I mean, people aren't exactly getting along either in LA right now.
Or anywhere, right?
Or anywhere,
There's a lot of
yeah.
division.
Oh, thank you for clarifying that. Anywhere, like, I'm from Boston initially. In Boston, here in Paris, people aren't, nobody's getting along. But.
Well, and I'll say that, being locked down in these quarantine conditions. I mean, I've got 3 kids, 4 cats, a dog, and a wife in this house with me. If somebody's not yelling at somebody else, it's an unusual moment. The stir craziness, the cabin fever really kicks in. And so we all have to be more understanding and tolerant of what's going on for us all, and accepting that, this is a rough situation we're in, but it'll get better eventually. We got to stick it out and still be here when it happens.
Yeah. And I mean, the plus side is that you get to spend more time with your kids, but the downside is
I got to spend more time with my kids.
You have to spend all the time with your kids, so it's like.
Nah, they're good kids, and they make a little too much noise for my taste sometimes, but let's cross all bear.
Yeah. And are they into the arts, the music, the film and stuff like that?
I wish they were more, and they're still pretty young, so it's sort of hard to say. My oldest they're all creative in their ways, but no, I haven't seen a desire to do. When I was a kid, I was into theater and I was into music. We haven't seen that in our kids. We have a piano in the house, and nobody ever sits down and plays it. Probably because Dad would yell, "Hey, stop it! It's too noisy." But they haven't shown an interest enough to get us to have them have lessons and that kind of thing. So they all like to listen to music. They like to sing when nobody's looking, and my daughter's very creative in terms of drawing and painting and that kind of stuff too.
So they don't get into the TikToks and all this other stuff.
Well, their parents don't let them yet.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. So I'm 43 years old and I'm addicted to TikTok. I mean, it's just the way that they use music with the videos and the way that. So I think that TikTok is a completely undiscovered medium. I know it's like, it's through, I'm not sure like how many laws they're abiding by, like, as far as what we are talking about, like copyright free music and things like this. And I don't understand all that, but I'm sure that they're not following all the rules with that. It just seems like it to me. But it's like with TikTok, like I found that it's amazing because these little sound clips with the video and the things that you can edit into these videos, the effects and whatnot, it's unbelievable. Like it's such an artsy little fun. I'm not even going to call it a toy, but I don't get so I make videos for LinkedIn and like they're horrible. Like the tools that are available it's like white, like that Jackass TV show, like text. And it's just like, and then everything about it is like the little fun little emojis that you can put in, like they're not animated, but TikTok's got all that. It's got filters, animations, everything you can put in there. But I mean, what's your opinion on this? I guess to take a quick segue away from podcasting, but what's your opinion on the way that TikTok uses music and the way you can kind of follow the music around from video to video and then trace it back to the initial, I guess, creator of the sound, who more or less could be ripping off that sound, but for some reason they just let it fly?
I'm not enough of a user. I've looked at TikTok for about 15 minutes one day and I said, okay, this really isn't for me. It's just not something I'm interested in. And I found it, there was a lot of curse words and a lot of, sort of obscene gestures in the first few videos that I saw. So that may have turned me off. My understanding is that they do have some music licensing in place, and so there is a fair amount of legal music use going on. But I also see that there are people making TikTok videos of, singing along with Lady Gaga or something like that, and there's no way that's licensed. It tends to be short snippets, so they may be relying on the fair use exception here in the U.S. and similar principles elsewhere. I'm not exactly sure how they're getting away with it, other than maybe they're just being allowed to get away with it for now, and the rights holders are biding their time, waiting for the opportunity to strike. So, I mean, this year with our president threatening to ban TikTok and that kind of thing, why would you bother going and chasing after a company that's not going to be here in 6 months? Now that things are changing, we may see more action on that front. And I think they want to be legitimate and legal here in the U.S. As more users adopt it here. So we'll see. My guess is they've got some valid ideas about the business plan, and like all these tech companies, and when Spotify started out, they didn't have a plan to pay for music, and they were, eventually they realized they would have to, and that's probably what will happen with TikTok as well.
Sure, yeah. And speaking, I'm glad you brought up fair use, Gordon, because fair use in regards to podcasts. So I probably shouldn't be admitting this on the phone, but I used to interview or on a podcast, I guess that's going to be listened to by millions of people, Gordon. So it's Joe Rogan, move over. But it's funny because I have a couple friends in the punk rock world, and basically they kind of don't care about any of this stuff. But what's funny is that I actually I didn't buy the rights to it, but I used the music, their own music, for songs that they wrote, but were through the record company, in the context of their podcast episodes. And I didn't use the whole song. I used maybe half the song, nicely edited out and stuff like that. But I'm sure I broke all kinds of rules about that. But I mean, what's the deal? And I think you covered this a little bit in Podcastification, which, folks, if you haven't heard it, it's probably the best podcast about podcasting that you can listen to. But as far as fair use goes, I've heard that 30-second rule. And then I know on YouTube, everybody gets away with the 30 seconds of video clips and all this other stuff. But what is the real situation with that?
There is no 30-second rule. That's a myth. There's no rule of thumb at all about fair use. Every single case of an infringement that wants to say it's fair use, you got to go through this formal 4-factor complicated analysis. There's no guarantee that it'll come out the same from episode to episode or use to use of a piece of music. Now, there are some guidelines we can incorporate. For example, when you're talking to the band about their music and you want to play a little bit of it as a sample to give people a taste and you're not using the whole thing, that's probably going to come in. Either it's coming in as a fair use, or while the record label would have preferred that you ask them for permission, they probably would have given it. And so they're not going to care too much. I mean, hell, it helps promote the band. And the band was there when you incorporated this, or at least knew you were going to do it. And so they gave their approval. So, it's sort of a no harm, no foul kind of a situation. That's getting away with it, not doing things right. On the fair use side, you got these 4 factors. How much did you use? What's the nature and the purpose and character of the use? And what's the impact on the market and all of that? And, that'll weigh out differently depending on each individual little bit that's used. My concern, first of all, the fair use exception is really a U.S. principle, because it comes up under the First Amendment free speech principles. But so it only works in the U.S. In other countries it wouldn't. But also, by the time you get to have the conversation, a meaningful argument about whether it's fair use or not, you're paying lawyers to do that conversation for you. And you may very well be paying those lawyers to do it standing in front of a judge in a courtroom somewhere. That is not an inexpensive or easy or comfortable scenario to be in. Lawsuits are expensive, time-consuming, and fraught with headaches. So while it may be convenient mentally to say, oh, it's fair use, I'll just do it. If you get caught, if you're the one in 100 that gets caught and someone wants to make an example of you, it will be extraordinarily uncomfortable.
Right. And are you more on the defense or the prosecution side of that fence? Like not that fence specifically. I mean, in general with your practice.
That's interesting. Part of me wants to say, well, I represent whoever is paying me to represent them. But most of the time for me, that's the later, and by the way, I don't go to court. I don't do those kinds of disputes, but I'm a deal guy. I do structuring and business and that kind of stuff. But when I'm asked, it's usually by a creator, podcaster or a filmmaker, something like that. How can I use this music legally? And I can't pay for it. Well, then, fair use is one of the tools in our arsenal. And we do the analysis and we say, yeah, we think this would satisfy the fair use rules. For filmmakers, for TV shows and folks like that, they have to have insurance, and they can't get the insurance unless they've got all the licenses lined up, or they've got a lawyer's letter saying this appears to be fair use, and here's why. And so a lot of the work that I do is rendering those kinds of opinions when asked.
Okay, great. Actually, could I seek a quick piece of legal advice on the air from you?
Yes, with the caveat that what I say is going to be worth exactly what you're paying for it, and that I'm not giving legal advice to the audience and out there in general, nor to you. I'll probably say you should speak to a lawyer to specifically look at your situation. But if you want to run something by me in a sort of hypothetical terms, I'm happy to give it some thought.
Well, yes, this is folks, this is a strictly hypothetical, allegedly this may have happened to a friend of mine. So I filmed a video. There are these goats here in Paris,
yeah.
And they're right near a busy train station, like on the side of a hill, right where the train goes by. And I would drive by these goats on the train, and I had no idea what the purpose of these goats, why they were there, right? So then I asked this guy in an Indian restaurant, and he told me that they're actually owned by the city, and they're like landscapers for the grass and the shrubbery on the side of this mountain next to Saint Lazare. And I found that fascinating. So I got all the footage. I went right up close to where the goats kind of come. It's very rare that they come by the fence, but it was like a 3-month project for me filming. Yeah. So after all this, I finally wanted to interview the people that handle the goats, I guess, make the decision. So then I went to the city, and the lady spoke English there, and she's like, you need a permit to film the goats. And she goes, then when you have a permit, then you can make an appointment to talk to a city worker. And so when I released that on YouTube, could I get in trouble for that?
Well, first of all, that sounds like a very French approach to things. But that now that you've filmed it, by the way, you need to ask for permission for the permit, and we'll see. Could you get into okay, I'm an American lawyer. I'm going to base my answer on what American law would be. If you didn't have the permit that you needed, and you had done, you essentially violated a law by showing up and filming something, the city could theoretically use that film as evidence that you did this act. And so, I guess you could theoretically be on the wrong end of, getting fined or something like that. Here in the U.S., I think that you would have some strong First Amendment arguments that you shouldn't have had to get a permit to make this film in the first place. That if you were standing on a place that was accessible to the general public, you didn't need a permit to. Once you cross over the fence line, you're on restricted land somehow. That might be a little different. But if you were filming from a public place and things that were easily visible from the public place, I would strongly argue that you didn't need any special permission. The trick is that you got to get the interview subject to agree to give the interview, and if he's in charge of issuing permits, he's going to have some concern. He or she is going to have some concerns about projecting that it's okay to ignore the permit rule, that kind of thing.
Did you hear that, French lawyers? That's some advice from the entertainment lawyer from America going, no, it's not. It's non-binding legal advice, folks.
But again, here in the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, that goes a long way into protecting your right to go and film public acts and public events and things like that. I don't know. My understanding is the French law is similar in its protection of press and speech kinds of freedoms, but I can't speak to those things directly.
Yeah, that's great. Do you know of the YouTuber, the Twitch guy? His name is Kit Boga, and he actually does these pranks on scam artists that call from India. Have you ever heard this guy or seen him?
No, but I love the concept.
It's a great concept, and he's got like he pitch changes his voice so he sounds like a little old lady and stuff.
Oh yeah.
It's amazing. Like, I hope this guy's making a lot of money because he completely takes these guys for a ride, and like he actually designs fake desktops on his computer and fake banks and stuff so they can like log into like his bank, because that's what they do. They change the HTML around on the computer to make it look like, you know, like they deposited all this money into your bank account by accident. And then when it's a long-winded kind of scam, but he completely takes them. Like, there was one case, he took this guy for like a 3-day ride. Like, pretty much it's like 9 hours a day. Like, it was like 27 hours of like scamming the scammer. So could he get in trouble for that, do you think?
Oh gosh. You know, maybe there's a small chance that, you know, I mean, there are some places where it's illegal to record a conversation unless all the parties consent to the recording. So if he's doing that, it might be a violation, but they'd have to come in and say, wait a minute, I was there, I'm the scammer. I was doing something illegal and he recorded it. You should punish him. You know, that's sort of we call that an unclean hands kind of a defense or whatever. There's sometimes some invasion of privacy kinds of things. Although again, if somebody calls you and opens up the conversation, making an example of them is, again, free speech, First Amendment here in the U.S., very powerful, very, very strongly protected.
Absolutely. And so in podcasting, what do you think the future of the podcasting industry is?
Well, I think for the next few years, we're going to see more of this consolidation and industrialization of things. I think we're also going to see more and more advertising revenue coming into the space. As podcasting grows in popularity, sponsors are interested in reaching audiences. It's one of the great things about it is that it's very narrowly tailored audience. You can have, it's not broadcasting, it's narrowcasting. You can reach, women in their early 50s who love to knit and have, allergies to peanuts. You could probably track that narrow of an audience in the podcasting space and send them ads that are really, really well tailored to them. That's the part of the huge promise of this. And so advertisers want to spend their money wisely, and they're gonna invest in this more and more. On the listener side, I think we're gonna see smaller shows going by the wayside, a lot of pod fading, the folks that don't make it past 7 or 10 episodes. Because right now, in the quarantine mode, everybody's got the time on their hands, and they're sitting there looking at a computer saying, I could do that. I can make a recording. And so you start up a podcast and you give it a shot. But as life gets busy again, I think some of those will fall by the wayside as well. And the OGs, the folks that have been doing it a while and kind of know the ropes, will keep at it, and the voices will continue to be heard. So I'm bullish about podcasting. I think it's a great medium and a great culture, and all the folks out there who do podcast. I mean, I'm friends with so many people in the podcasting community, and I really like these people. Everybody's got something important to say and share, and it's a very cooperative, collaborative feeling among everybody. So I'm very excited about it.
Great. And so that'll conclude this interview with Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer.
Thanks for having me on the show, Rob.
Yeah, and thanks so much for dropping by, Gordon. I appreciate it. I had a lot of questions about royalty-free music and podcasting in general and how they related to each other, and I think you did a great job of answering those questions, which I would expect from the entertainment law, the entertainment lawyer that I see the most on YouTube, talking about everything in regards to video. And
what's funny is I haven't made a new made-for-YouTube video in like 2 or 3 years. Those things are out there and they're getting views, and it's great. I really, when I started doing them, I was batching them, doing 3 or 4 or 5 at a time and releasing them. And then I just sort of let it go. And I actually have a virtual assistant in the Philippines who's my editor, basically. She's sitting around going, what am I supposed to be doing with my time, man? I'm paying her every week, and she's not editing any video. She does other stuff, but I should get back to answering more questions and doing more of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, sounds great.
Thanks
and
for the kick in the pants.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks. And again, thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate it. And folks out there, make sure to check out the Entertainment Law Review podcast. And that's
Entertainment Law Update.
Law Update. I wrote down review for some reason. It's the Entertainment Law Update podcast, and that's on Apple, iTunes, podcasting.
Most
what
of
other
the
platforms?
Directories have us. Yeah.
Okay, great. And thanks again, Gordon. Have a great night.
Thanks, you, Rob.